Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this remarkable symposium for including me in these enriching discussions and for their warm hospitality in this beautiful city of Budapest. Thank you very much. The organizers have asked me and my colleague, Professor Lucas Rasmussen, to speak about the French codification of private law. I will focus on the modern codification phenomenon, while Lucas Rasmussen will deal with specific and recent reform of our civil code. So the French codification of private law is influenced by historical factors. These factors determine the meaning of codification in each period considered, as there was the time when codification occurs, as it was the case from 1804 to 1810, and starting from 1850. And there were moments when codification does not take place, as was the case from 1810 to 1910. Can we then say that Napoleonic codifications have the same signification as more recent ones? This single question already shows that the subject invites us to make distinctions. And the French doctrine does make these distinctions. The most significant one opposes codifications with modifications, whose preparation is entrusted to scholars, and codification à droit constant, which constitutes an arrangement of the existing positive law by technocrats. The codification of consumer law in 1993 and the recodification of commercial law in 2000 are the most notable examples of codification à droit constant, while the Civil Code of 1804 is the best example of a codification modification. But contrary to popular belief, there is now a consensus to affirm that, like the Commercial Code of 1807, the Civil Code is more of a compilation at its origin than truly original work. Indeed, if we accept rare solutions, such as the concept of property, exclusively in its individual state dialectic, we can show what Article 544 provides to see it, or the absolute equality of legitimate children inheriting from their parents, Article 745, the Civil Code is based on unifying choices between different but equally legitimate legal solutions in force at the codification time. Thus, contrary to what was sometimes being argued, neither the binding force of agreements nor the general obligation to repair damages caused by one's own fault are the result of an individualistic philosophy that the code's drafters would have embraced under the influence of the Enlightenment. However, it will be posited that French codification encompasses several ideas: the ideas of prestige, power, culture, and identity, as well as the ideas of rationality and, of course, the ideas of coherence and simplicity. It will also be posited that any codification is a perfectible work and, therefore, elicits reactions. These postulates can provide answers to three classical questions related to any codification: quid, quo modo, and cure. That means, what is the signification in France of codification of law? How to codify law, and what to codify? With these ideas in the background, and to provide an implicit response to these questions within the French context, I'd suggest considering in the first place the signification of the French codification of private law, and in the second place, the crisis that this codification faces today. In the first place, the French codification of private law appears to have a dual significance that ultimately justify its existences. On the one hand, the Napoleonic codification aimed to impose a political project, while, on the other hand, the codification of 20th century sought to establish itself in the international market. Let us examine these two meanings successively. On one hand, the codification of French private law in the early 19th century reflects the political will of Napoleon Bonaparte. Fundamentally, this codification is based on political, historical, social, cultural, and technical factors, as well as the collective consciousness of the people who have long aspired to the unity, stability, and simplicity of the law. Indeed, the law in force in early 18th century was neither uniform, stable, nor simple. On one side, there was Roman law, revived by the interpretation given to Justinian's compilations, which was attributed the expression jus communi to denote its empire beyond borders. On the other side, there were customs and statutes that, before being national, were regional or local. This later set of sources constitute iura propria, among which were also counted a few royal ordinances applicable throughout the empire. Thus, in 1789, France still had 65 general customs and 300 local customary variations in the northern part of the kingdom, while the south obeyed Roman law as ratio scripta, which nevertheless varied according to the jurisdiction of the parliaments. Codification thus represents an important moment in the history of sources and the French civil order, by proposing the rationalization of the law through a systematic organization of laws and a short, precise, and comprehensive set of rules. Codification reinforces the very authority of the law, the statute. It was Napoleon's political project to promote a social order based on the rule of law, to which all citizens are equal. This authority of the law is itself dominated by an authoritarian ideology that subordinates individual interests to the collective interests, such as the freedom under surveillance of contractors or the regulation of the family in the image and service of the great nation, la grande nation, ou la grande patrie. This authority of the laws is further reinforced by the fact that Napoleonic codification aims to be an all-encompassing and totalitarian work. The codification of civil law excels in this dual objective. It ambitiously seeks to gather exclusively to entire of the laws governing various aspects of social life. In contractual matters, for example, it leaves only one provision concerning the proof of commercial acts to the commercial code. The general abrogation of the ancien droit governing the matters composing the civil code, as stated in Article 7 of the law of 30 Ventose, year 12, attests to the totalitarian aspect of civil codification. This dimension is also expressed throughout the standardization achieved by codification. For Portalis, the mere existence of a uniform civil code is a monumentum that guarantees the perpetual return of internal peace to the state. This peace would be all the more guaranteed as the civil code aims to unify the nation by establishing a transaction between written law and customs and between ancien droit and revolutionary legislation, which eliminated the humiliating distinctions introduced by political laws between individuals and had infiltrated the civil law. Ultimately, Napoleonic codifications was linked to the historical process of centralizing political power. From this perspective, the Civil Code of 1804, the Code of Civil Procedure of 1806, the Commercial Code of 1807, the Code of Criminal Procedure of 1808, and the Penal Code of 1810, all these codes contributed to the affirmation of this power. However, if codification aimed to impose a political project, it gradually proved unable to fulfill that purpose. The Napoleonic codes, written to be accessible to the citizens, quickly revealed the limitations of their simplicity. Indeed, on the other hand, France faced the globalization of markets after World War II. To establish itself in the international market, codification appeared as an adequate response to in the eyes of the authorities. And this can be seen from two perspectives. Firstly, codification is a response to the very idea of what a developed country is. A country which, with a codified legal structure, is a developed country. It is this idea that led, for example, China to adopt the Civil Code in 2020. The logic is simple. It is essential to ensure that all economic actors have access to a set of rules related to the particular field. Furthermore, codification is a response to the competitive approach of legal systems today. To face this challenge, France has adopted a multitude of special codes, most of which are comprehensive and cross-cutting. For example, the Consumer Code of 1993 governs issues related to civil law, commercial law, economic law, criminal law, administrative law, and procedure. We can also mention the Intellectual Property Code of 1992, the Commercial Code of 2000, the Monetary and Financial Code of 2001, the Insurance Code of 1976, and the Transport Code of 2010. In total, there are currently 78 official codes, of which no fewer than 40 concerns private law. This codification policy is carried out by the Superior Codification Commission under the presidency of the Prime Minister. Since its creation in 1989, over 60% of legislative texts and nearly 40% of regulatory texts have been codified. One must know that the weight of norms in France, national ones, exclusively national ones, in 2021 amounts to the 44.1 million words. So, to achieve these results, the Commission favors codification à droit constant. Despite this effort to bring order to a disordered legal system, the illusions and negative effects of excessive codification have been widely highlighted by legal scholars. Let's take the example of the recodification of the Commercial Code in 2000. Recodification or recodifying the French Commercial Code primarily meant gathering the provisions of commercial law into a commercial code rather than developing a code specifically for commerce or economic activities. It is therefore not a true new commercial code, but a compilation of previously applicable statutes made without taking into account jurisprudence. These criticisms are compounded by the consequences affecting most codifications à droit constant, namely, the effect of accumulating text, the lack of clarity and coherence, and the insufficiencies and incompleteness. When considering the number and importance of the codes adopted in recent decades, this criticism reveals more than just the flaws of a particular code. They expose the weakness of the codification policy in France. As a result, the extent of codification in private law has led to a crisis in French codification. In the second place, then the crisis. French codification is facing a dual crisis. On one hand, there is a growing crisis within codification itself to its excess. And on the other hand, there is a crisis of confidence in codification due to its limitations. Let's examine these 2 points successively. Firstly, there is a growing crisis within codification caused by 2 factors: the multiplication of codes and their internal confusion. The multiplication of codes meets the constitutional requirement of legal accessibility for citizens. However, it is the opposite result that is observed. Indeed, the multiplication of codes makes the law less accessible and even less coherent. Coupled with codification à droit constant, which does not allow for defining the guidelines of codification, the plurality of codes often requires French lawyers to consult multiple codes to fully grasp the question at hand. For instance, despite the recodification of our commercial code in 2000, several rules applicable to commerce must be sought in the monetary and financial code, the intellectual property code, the consumer code, and not to mention the civil code. In addition to the need to consult multiple codes, there is an abundance of jurisprudence that often adds to the complexity of the legislated matter. The result is unsatisfactory. While codification supposes rationality to rationalize the sources of rules governing a particular subject matter and facilitate access to them, the codification of French private law has achieved the opposite. Furthermore, administrative codification, excluding the civil code and to some extent the Code Civil of Procedure. Administrative codification produces codes such as the labor code with structure and contents that are not very readable. Sometimes even the rationality of the code itself is at stake. For example, by significantly expanding the matters it covers, the Recodification of Commercial Law in 2000 introduced a portion of consumer law and distribution law into Book 3 of the legislative part of the Commercial Code, which deals with certain types of sales and exclusivity clauses. The lack of readability is exacerbated by the fact that many codes consist of a legislative part and a regulatory part, depend on the legislative or regulatory origin of the codified provisions. The provisions are preceded by an L when they come in from the old laws, or a R or D when they come from a decree. Articles identified by an R or R correspond to provisions under a decree from the Council of State, while those identified by a D, Article D 24, for example, corresponds to provisions under a decree that was not adopted in front of or by the Council of State. Some codes even have a part labeled A, which relates to ministerial orders. Moreover, the numbering of articles is not uniform. The numbering, of articles is not uniform. While it is continuous in the Civil Code, it is decimal in almost codes, resulting from administrative codification. Additionally, the writing style is anything but clear and simple. Most importantly, it is difficult to navigate within the codes. The provisions necessary to understand the question are often scattered across different parts of the code, making their combination and interpretation a real Chinese puzzle. Furthermore, versions of codes often change, and it is difficult to know which version was in force at the time of the facts involved. In summary, it takes great expertise to handle French private law codes. We are far from Napoleon's ambition to offer citizens an orderly, systematic, and coherent set of rules that are few, clear, and simple, even if, according to Bernard Steen, the vice president of the Superior Codification Commission, administrative codification has made French law more respectful of the hierarchy of norms, more coherent and more orderly. The situation is even more unsatisfactory considering that another deeper crisis affects the French legal system today, a crisis of confidence in codification itself, as it does not curb legislative inflation and the persistence of numerous special statutes. Indeed, on the other hand, to finish, several special legislations coexist with the codes of private law despite their common subject matters. This is the case with the 1985 law on civil liability resulting from road accidents. The regime established by this statute has not been integrated into the Civil Code and is at risk of remaining outside the code according to the 2020 Senate bill draft for the reform of our civil liability law. Without aiming for exhaustiveness, we could also mention the persistence of several special statutes governing matters regulated by the Civil Code, such as the 1965 Statute on Core Ownership or the 1975 Statute on Subcontracting. This legislative pluralism not only creates difficulties in articulating sources, but also affects the role of the codes. In many areas, codes are playing an increasingly subsidiary role instead of being their main repository. This crisis reveals the limitations, maybe, of French codification, which suffers from codification à droit constant, method, and the ivresse des lois, drunkenness of bills, referred to by Philippe Mallory. Therefore, it is more than ever time to revisit Portalis to free society from the excess and complexity of legislation. As he said in its discourse, legislation must be moderated. And laws are made from men, for men, not men for laws. To achieve my speech, it is necessary not only to return to legislative sobriety, but also to the scientific, intellectual nature of any true codification or codifying work. As stated by Frédéric Portalis, Portalis' grandson, what is codification if not the embodiment of methodology applied to legislation? Codification must once again become the work of scholars and not of technocrats. In this perspective, we should follow the systematic method that has been consistently employed since 1945 for the reforms of our Civil Code and assign the task of preparing codification projects to the savants, law professors, academics, and practitioners. The quality of recent French reform in contract law, the general regime of obligations, and security law mitigates, should I say, the crisis of confidence in codification, and thus prevents this crisis from becoming a crisis of civil law. Above all, it demonstrates, once again, the wise choice made by Greek codifiers since Justinian to entrust experienced jurists with the task of codifying the law. The choice is also being made for the upcoming reforms in the law of the civil liability, private international law, and special contract law. But now I am stepping onto the terrain of my colleague and friend Lucas Rasmussen, and I will stop here. Thank you very much.